Okay, we'll get started. So, good morning. I'm Matt Wrigley, Programme Director for Round 5 at the Crown Estate. It's great to see so many of you here today, and I really hope that you've had a chance to stretch your legs and grab some refreshment after a couple of sort of really engaging and invigorating speeches this morning. I'm sure many of you have come to here today with a keen interest in finding out more about the Round 5 leasing process. I've just popped the Slido back up on here. It's in the bottom corner behind me. Here. And since the publication of the information memorandum, we've had lots of interest. We've seen that directly through queries that have come into the Round 5 inbox. I've seen no end of interest all over social media, lots of people sort of chatting and engaging about the Round 5 proposition. And the purpose of this section of the day is to walk us through some of the detail of the leasing round, both the design of the leasing round and then for us to share some information about what our expectations are as we step through the various stages of the process, such that you go away from here with many of those answers, many of those questions answered. So we've structured this session to take us through the key stages of the process. I'll be kicking us off, and then I'll be joined by some colleagues from the leasing team, and we'll take probably an hour and 20 minutes in this section to go through the leasing process. During that time, we'll take a couple of pauses. This is quite an information-heavy section. And as we said at the start of the day, the Slido is open for us to take questions later. So please use those sort of short pauses to just digest the information and make sure that you try and capture any questions that you have on the Slido. And we ask that you sort of don't just leave the auditorium during that period, but we'll just be pausing so that we've got a chance to take our breath and make sure that you can digest and ask those questions. So the way questions will work today is that we're expecting you to have come with many questions today, and as we go through the content, some things will jump into your minds. The Slido will be open throughout this session and probably for about the first 15 minutes of the lunch break. So again, at the end, if you've got questions, we'll give you some time over the lunch break to get those questions in. And then there's a Q&A session after lunch. The first of those Q&A sessions will be dedicated to the leasing and spatial design elements. So the section that you heard from Joe earlier and the elements you're going to hear about next. So please do try and get your questions in on spatial design and leasing before about the first 15 minutes of the lunch break. And then what we'll do in the panel session this afternoon is that we'll address some of the most frequently asked questions on Slido, and then we'll have an open mic so that if you've got a burning question that we haven't addressed as part of those frequently asked questions, you'll also have the opportunity to ask that during that panel session. We don't expect to answer all of your questions here today, but it is our intention to issue an update to you between now and the launch of the PQQ with some of those frequently asked questions, some of which we will address today and some of which we might take away. And then as we go into the formal tender process, there will of course be the usual clarification question and answer process, which will allow us to address some of your more detailed questions about how you complete the tender. So first, some introductions for the team before I go on. So as I said, I'm Matt Wrigley. I'm Programme Director for Round 5. Over the next hour or so, you'll be joined, or I'll be joined on the stage by colleagues from the leasing team at the Crown Estate and some of the key minds behind the development of the tender and the design of the tender and leasing process. So first, we'll hear from Nello Bazzato, who's the Round 5 Senior Tender Delivery Manager. Then we'll hear from Simon Goodwin, who's a special advisor to the Crown Estate on leasing. And then finally, Jess Astle, who's our legal counsel and our legal lead for Round 5. So you'll have a bit of a mix of speakers. So starting from me with an overview, the leasing process that you'll have seen in the information memorandum can be broken down into 4 key stages. So this is PQQ, ITT Stage 1, ITT Stage 2, which includes the auction, and then entry into the wind farm agreement for lease. At a high level, these will look probably pretty familiar to everybody. That is quite a traditional approach, and what we're going to do is to try and delve into some of the key highlights and some of the things that might be slightly different to normal as we step through the process. And it's this four-stage process that we've sort of structured this element of the presentation around. So if we just see how this is going to play out over the next year. So what you see in front of you is what you saw in the information memorandum. And you heard from Gus that you're going to see something slightly different in a second, so I'm going to show you a slightly revised timeline. Since the publication of the information memorandum, we've come to the end of the design phase for the leasing round. And as such, at the end of that design phase, we've reviewed the timeline, both for the bidder elements, so the elements of the tender that you'll be responding to, and our elements. And we reviewed that based on three key considerations. Firstly, we want to give participants the best opportunity to put your best foot forward in tender responses, so to make sure that you've got enough time to do your research and pull together the right tender responses. Secondly, to allow time for the Crown Estate to conduct an efficient, effective and fair evaluation of tender responses. And then thirdly, and quite critically, given what we've heard today about where we are in the stage of development for floating offshore wind, to keep us moving forward with momentum for commercialising floating wind in the Celtic Sea. So as a consequence of that, and with those considerations in mind, I'm showing to you now the revised timeline that we'll be working towards for round 5. A couple of key things to pull out for you. We now fully expect that ITT Stage 1 will conclude this year, with bidders progressing into the ITT Stage 2 in the auction, being notified of that decision before Christmas. The Round 5 auction is now planned to take place in early March, with bidders notified of the outcome of the auction by the end of the financial year 24-25. And then the window for entry into AFL comes forward from the start of March, with AFLs awarded soon after. So we've really worked hard to try and bring forward some of the key moments at the back end of this process so that we can get into agreements for lease as early as possible on these project development areas. We should note that the schedule is a live product and is necessarily live. We'll keep it under review. If we can be more efficient as we go, we'll let you know. And of course, as we publish the formal tender documentation, as we step through the process, there'll be key dates which we'll update you on, and you'll have very precise dates around things like expectations for submissions, the windows that will be open for clarification questions, etc. Just be minded, please, that those dates will be quite firm dates, particularly for clarification windows and for tender responses. And it's very unlikely that we'll be able to accept any tender response or clarification question that falls outside of those windows. So when we publish in the first phase, the PQQ, please make sure you familiarise yourselves with those dates, allow enough time to get those questions in up front, and allow enough time in tender responses for completeness checking and all of those other good things that need to happen. A word on the Round 5 tender portal. So the portal is live now for expressions of interest, and we're really keen for you to express your interest. This is important to us because it gives us a really early indication of who's serious about bidding for Round 5. And on the note that I just talked about on the timeline, it really helps us to plan our back office activity to make sure that we're tooled up and equipped to meet the demands that are going to be placed on us to deliver on our elements of the timeline. So you'll be really helping us out by expressing an interest. It's non-binding, so the expression of interest we won't be holding anybody to, and importantly, we're not asking you to give us information about any consortiums that you might be forming or anything else at this point in time. This really does just give us a really helpful early indication to support our planning. The upside also is that if you express an interest and register on the portal, you'll be directly informed of when the contract notice and the PQQ documentation go live. So you won't be sort of having to hit refresh like trying to buy Glastonbury tickets or what have you on the morning of the big day. You'll get an email from us letting you know we are all systems go. Once the tender has launched, the portal will become the mandatory and only means of communication with the Crown Estate on round 5. So it's just important to note that it will be communication through the tender, which is how we'll be managing the information flow between ourselves and you. If in the meantime you do have general queries about round 5, please do continue to use the round 5 inbox. Absolutely our preference that you use that round 5 inbox rather than contacting people on a one-to-one basis. So whilst the 4-stage process that I talked you through is a pretty familiar format, before I hand over to my colleagues to take us through that 4-stage process, I wanted to just take this chance to highlight and explore with you a couple of the key features of round 5 up front. So at a headline level, you heard from Tim earlier, we have 3 PDAs, each of up to 1.5 gigawatts. This is a floating offshore wind round, and sort of acknowledging the transformative opportunity of floating offshore wind, but also some of the challenges that we face in commercializing floating offshore wind. We've designed a tender in such a way that ought to help us maximize those opportunities and help us navigate through some of those key risks. Some things to draw your attention to. So safety first. It's really important for me to highlight this to you. So safety first is the Crown Estate's enhanced philosophy on safety, and which we want to run through the heart of round 5. We're really committed to inspiring exemplary and caring safety leadership throughout our projects, our commitments and our supply chain. And in doing so, we've flowed some of those enhanced safety requirements and commitments into our tender design. On ports, and again, picking up on the point that Tim made, we know that securing ports rights to deliver the marshalling and integration activities for successful round 5 projects is going to be a key dependency for success. And for the best chance for us to achieve that, we've included some requirements for early port engagement and commitment as part of our ITT Stage 1. On social value, driving wider social and environmental value is a key objective of our Round 5 programme, as it is for the Crown Estate as a whole. I think Gus touched on this earlier. On social value, we've included provisions whereby bidders really need to show us how they're going to deliver positive social and environmental outcomes in the communities. As we talk through the rest of the presentation, Nello's going to explain a bit more about the detail of the mechanics of the port's commitments, the safety commitments, and the social value commitments. Specific to environmental value, the wind farm agreement for lease will require or will include an obligation to support our aim to accelerate progress towards net positive outcomes for the environment and improve resilience of marine ecosystems in the Celtic Sea. So whilst this won't be evaluated as part of the tender process, and that's a key important point to note, you will need to provide a plan on entry or after entry into the agreement for lease, which demonstrates how you're going to achieve positive outcomes and contribute towards marine ecosystems in the Celtic Sea. We've been doing a lot of work in this area with key stakeholders, including SNCBs and others, and we've identified quite a long list of the types of interventions that might come forward to support Round 5 projects. As I said, whilst this won't be evaluated as part of the tender process, we'll be publishing more information about the work that we've been doing with SNCBs and that long list of the types of interventions to give you early visibility of the types of things we've been thinking about so that you can take that into account whilst you're developing your proposals. Important to note that we won't be expecting you to choose from our list, and this is where we really want to see your insight and innovation when we get to agreements for lease and explore those plans with you. On ascending clock auction, I think this has already been touched upon, but this is an evolution of our approach. It brings us into line with global best practice, and it will give us transparent price discovery for bidders, and will help the Crown find the true economic value of each of the project development areas. Simon's going to talk us through the concept and then some of the details of the mechanics of the ascending clock auction in due course. And then on risk sharing and consenting, this is an acknowledgement of the nascent nature of flow. And we've decided to offer risk share on unforeseen risks attributed to consenting. And again, Jess will talk us through the details of the mechanics of that in due course. Just a note I want to leave you with on some of these key elements is that these things on the screen are things that all of us in this room really care about. The reason we've built them into the tender is that they're things that we really care about, and we want to capture your ideas and your best thinking. To support that, we're going to give you the tools that you need to succeed in responding to these questions and to responding to our tender. So when we publish the PQQ and ITT documentations, there'll be quite clear instructions, or very clear instructions, as to what we're expecting to see, what we're expecting you to provide in terms of evidence, and then how we're going to evaluate that. So we'll be completely transparent up front as to what we're expecting and how we're going to evaluate that in the process. So back to the four-stage process, and at this point, I'd like to invite Nello Bazzato to the stage, who's going to take us through the pre-qualification questionnaire.
All right, thank you, Matt, and good morning, all. I'm Nello Bazzato. I'm Senior Tender Delivery Manager at the Crown Estate. And I would like now to take you through the pre-qualification questionnaire and its main characteristics. In terms of timing, we expect to publish the contract notice on the Government Finder Tender Service website, and at the same time make the PQQ documents available on the Crown Estate portal on the 28th of February 2024. The pre-qualification questionnaire will focus on and explore your experience, looking back at your track record across three main areas: legal, technical, financial, and I will talk about these more in a few minutes. The PQQ submission windows will be open for approximately 7 weeks, which gives you ample time to respond to the questionnaire and also ask any clarification questions you may have during the first period of the submission window. As Matt mentioned, all bidders' questions and answers will be via the portal only, and they will be managed in a transparent process. So generally, all answers will be shared with all the bidders, unless some of the specific questions are confidential, in which case will be dealt directly only with the company requesting that information. Let's have a look now at who can participate in the pre-qualification questionnaire and in a round 5 tender in general. So we are welcoming bids from sole bidders, so single companies, or consortium with up to 6 members. So you have the opportunity to form the consortium that gives you the best chances to meet the criteria and be successful in the process. Sole bidders and consortium members can draw upon their corporate experience and financial standing to support the submissions, where a member of any of the group that has at least 10% stake in the bidders can provide this support and this experience. I would like to be clear here that we mean corporate project experience and financial standing. So in other words, we are not looking at the experience of individuals or their CVs, but company experience and track record. In terms of timing, a consortium must be formed by the time the PQQ response is due, and any changes from that point would need our approval at our sole discretion. So this means that if you would like to change the composition of the consortium after the PQQ submission, it might be difficult and we might not allow it. You might appreciate that this is understandable, given that we'll be relying on all members of the consortium to pass the PQQ, and you'll need to demonstrate that any new consortium members or with some members dropping off the consortium, you would still meet the PQQ criteria. And again, I think you can understand this performing these extra tests and the potential repeating some of the PQQ tests for the proposed new members or for the reduced consortium would cause delays. in the process, and we may not be able to accommodate this. So in other words, look, we try to be flexible, and we understand that there might be changes of circumstances that would require you to change the consortium formation, and we want to be flexible up to a limit, but there might be pragmatic reasons that won't allow us to accept consortium changes. First of all, to keep also the very ambitious schedule that the matters illustrated earlier. So a message really is to encourage you to think carefully about your consortium plans and your strategy now, and so that you can have the best team in place to be successful in the process. In terms instead of the actual legal entity, the SPV, that will be entering the agreement for lease, this doesn't need to be incorporated until the IFL entry at the latest. So there is time for all the process for that. I now move on, giving you an overview of the legal criteria, the legal elements that you will find in the pre-qualification questionnaire, where bidders will be evaluated against mandatory and discretionary exclusion criteria relating to matters including bribery and fraud, tax compliance, money laundering, and other serious professional misconducts like breaches in the anti-slavery and other key legislation. So under the current legislation, the mandatory exclusion grounds require us to generally exclude a bidder who has been convicted of any of the offenses making up those grounds. By contrast, the discretionary exclusion grounds gives us the choice as to whether to exclude a bidder falling within the discretionary exclusion grounds, in line with the principles of equal treatment, non-discrimination, transparency, and proportionality. So this means that for certain questions, for example, those relating to bribery and fraud, any bidder that's been convicted will have the opportunity to demonstrate that despite any conviction, they have self-cleaned, for example, by paying compensation due, collaborating with the relevant authorities, and taking steps to prevent further breaches occurring. I would like to reassure you that you will find all the details in the PQQ documents, and where the transparent criteria and how this will be assessed, and whether there is an option for any companies that breach these obligations to self-clean, and these are set out for each question. In another, let's say, key part of the legal envelope of the pre-qualification questionnaire is the red flag process for the heads of terms for the key legal agreements, which are the preferred to be the letter, the agreement for lease, and the lease for both the wind farm and the transmission assets. So these principles, these head of terms, will be shared at the PQQ stage, and you will have the opportunity, it's not a mandatory stage, but you have the opportunity to flag to us any key issues that you can see in these terms that would prevent your company from entering into the legal agreements at the end of the process. So we are looking really for key issues. We are not intending to renegotiate the terms and conditions, but we will listen to some of the points raised. I move now on the technical evaluation criteria, which you can see in these slides. There are 5 key areas. Starting from the health and safety and environmental policies, what we are looking for is basically to have your submission of the signed and up-to-date policies related to health and safety and environmental matters, which comply with the regulation and show your commitment to HSE themes. We need this for the sole bidder and also for all consortium members. In terms of the HSE enforcement actions, where health and safety and environmental enforcement actions have been taken in the last 5 years, bidders must provide evidence to show that mitigation and corrective actions have been taken to prevent recurrence of these breaches. These would need to be relevant to the sole bidder entity or any consortium member, or any of their group entities that are involved in the management and delivery of offshore wind and offshore oil and gas projects. So we are looking only at breaches in these two sectors, in the offshore sectors. In terms of offshore delivery project management experience, we are looking at one project in the last 10 years, and we look at your direct experience of managing this project, which needs to be a minimum 100 megawatt offshore wind project, or an offshore oil and gas non-subsea project in waters with depths greater than 50 meters. So we would like to see your direct experience of managing this process until the final investment decision, so during the development phase. Similarly, for the offshore construction management or delivery, again, we are looking at one project in the last 10 years that has started in the last 10 years. And again, we want to see your direct experience of managing or delivering the construction of one offshore wind project of more than 100 megawatts, or an oil and gas not subsea project in the depths greater than 50 meters. In both cases, we are not looking at, let's say, floating offshore experience specifically, because clearly it's a nascent industry and the examples worldwide are limited. In terms of planning consent experience, we would like to see a demonstrable role in managing and making key decisions for the development consent order or equivalent for any major infrastructure project, which in the context of England and Wales Planning Act 2008, we mean a national significant infrastructure project. We want to see this from this application to successful grant of consent. You can select one project only, and the application must have been submitted in the last 10 years. Just to clarify in general for all these criteria, the evidence of relevant experience can be provided by any members of the sole bidders group, or any consortium member or a member of a consortium group with a minimum 10% stake in the sole bidder or consortium member. And I would like also to clarify that you can take, the experience can be drawn from different projects. It doesn't need to be for all the criteria from the same project. And also it can come from different parts of the consortium or the sole bidder or their group members with at least 10% stake. Okay. Looking now at the financial envelopes on a financial evaluation criteria, this will test the financial standing required to participate in round 5 and deliver a round 5 development. And there are 5 financial tender parameters that we are considering: the revenue ratio, the operating profit margin, the interest cover ratio, current ratio, and net asset balance. So these parameters will be tested on your last 3 most recent audited accounts. And there are 2 mandatory tests that need to be passed in each year, which are the revenue ratio and the net asset balance. And then you need to pass at least one of the other 3 parameters for each year. Basically, we wanted to build in some flexibility in the process, as we want to ensure that companies don't get excluded for a one-off difficulty that they may face in one single year due to contingency circumstances, for example, like during the COVID pandemic or a whole industry-related issue, where otherwise the companies have shown that they have a solid financial track record. So to respond to this financial PQQ questionnaire, you will have to upload the last 3 most recent sets of audited accounts, And you will have also to take some of the information from these accounts and transfer in a spreadsheet, which has also the advantage of giving you the results of the test so you can check before the submission that you would meet the minimum criteria. I would like now to introduce the concept of guarantors, where the bidders can rely on a guarantor to satisfy the PQQ financial criteria. And in order to qualify, a guarantor must have a direct or indirect equity shareholding of at least 10% in the sole bidder or the consortium member, for which it is providing the guarantee. So we expect any guarantor that you put forward to underwrite their commitment through a signed letter of support to be included in a bid submission. And clearly here the advantage is that if needed, guarantors are able to provide the necessary financial firepower to pass the PQQ criteria or to provide a minimum financial track record that the newly formed entity might not have. In this slide, I would like to cover instead how we are going to evaluate and weight the consortium member contribution to passing the financial standing questions. So a consortium will be evaluating on aggregate financial information from all the consortium members or their guarantors. And the financial information is weighted according to each consortium member's or guarantor's proposed contribution. So in other words, you can tell us how you want each member to contribute to these tests. So you have the flexibility to decide how much each consortium member brings to the table. There is no need for the members to pass the financial tender parameters individually. And with this, it takes to the end to the overview for the pre-qualification questionnaire. And I wanted just to remind in terms of the outcome of the PQQ, as Matt mentioned earlier, all questions will be evaluated on a pass or fail basis, and you have to pass every question to obtain an overall pass and be admitted to the next stage, which is the stage, ITT stage 1. You will be notified through the portal, and we have set no limit to number of bidders passing to the ITT stage. So I now appreciate that we've been through quite a lot of detail, and now I would like to have a short 5 minutes break so you can stretch your legs and I can take a breath. And before we move on then on the overview for the ITT. And in the meantime, I'll also remind you about the Slido, so if you have to type still any questions still, please, the code is here. And hopefully we sorted the access to the Wi-Fi. Okay, thank you. So I will see you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, so we move on the overview of the ITT stage 1. Again, I will give you first the information in terms of the timing. So it's expected to commence in August 2024, as Matt has shown in the revised timetable. So this is a look-forward process to test your plans to deliver around 5 development. There are 3 main components. There is a bidder undertaking, which includes the confirmation by bidders that they continue to satisfy the PQQ criteria, that there have been no changes to the bidder structure unless consented by TCE at our sole discretion, as we've seen earlier, and unconditional acceptance of the terms and draft legal agreement, which by that time you will have received. So you will have the full-termed legal agreements at this stage, at ITT stage 1. Then we have some technical questions, more coming up right now. And for the financial aspects, I will introduce you to the MLOC concept. Again, more to this to come in the next slides. Similarly to the pre-qualification questionnaire, the submission window will be open for approximately 7 weeks, which gives you ample time to respond to the questions and also to ask any clarification during the first period of the submission window. Again, all bidder questions and answers will be dealt in a similar process openly via the portal. I would like now to provide you an overview of the technical criteria, and I will be spending some time on this slide, which is really the core and the most substantial part of the ITT1. Again, all the answers and all the questions are on a pass-fail basis, but written responses must meet the sound and credible proposals tests. So they are evaluated, and then they will form part of the agreement for lease. And Jess will take in a next, later on, an overview of how these will be transferred. The responses to this questionnaire at ITT stage 1 will need to be PDA agnostic. In other words, will not be project development area specific, and this will allow you to bid any PDA during the next stage if you are successful. So during the auction, you have the ability to bid in any of the areas. Now I will go through the main criteria as shown here in this slide, starting from the HSE management, where we want you to show evidence of the management systems and processes that will be applied either through demonstration of a qualifying HSE system or a credible plan to develop one, because we do understand that some of the entities and consortium are quite new, so you will need some time to put all the systems in place. But we would like to have your reassurance that there is a credible plan for develop those. A process for managing compliance with the CDM regs, and also the approach for aligning with the G+ good practice guidance in the HSE space. In terms of consenting and stakeholder engagement, we want you to identify the consenting risks and the appropriate mitigations. Also, we would like to see how you intend to undertake the environmental impact assessment and have a plan for that as well. In terms of engineering risks, we like to see the identification of key engineering risks and the mitigations and the sources that you've used to identify such risks. Then your submission will require also to provide a schedule and organization structure for the development phase, again on a PDA agnostic basis. It needs to be just a high-level schedule, but it needs to demonstrate the logical sequencing and key dates compatible with contractual milestones. And together with this, there should be a clear understanding of the proposed team structure and governance. For the design envelope, we would like your confirmation that your development is within the design envelope used for the plan level HRA. I now move on the social value requirements. As my colleagues Matt, Tim, and Gus have highlighted earlier, the social value element is an innovative and key feature of this round 5. So we are really looking at bidders delivering positive social outcomes in specific areas through their developments. For each area, bidders must submit credible plans related to how they will work with communities and develop new employment and training opportunities. So it is now not my intention to walk through each of these plans. They are covered already in the information memorandum that I'm sure you've seen them already, and you can also easily refer to them after this presentation in the information memorandum. And you can ask any question on the slide if you have still some areas that you would like to explore more. However, I think it may be more helpful giving you some details on the format of the responses. So for each response, we'll be providing templates that will guide you on the level of the details that we expect to see in your plans, and how to lay out your commitments and approach, including an outline timetable. We will be also asking for a plan that explains how you will track and monitor your social outputs, as well how you will work with the Crown Estate to deliver these benefits. So round 5 is a long-term project, and we intend that it will create a strong legacy. So we will be looking for meaningful commitments from our preferred bidders. Another key area, ports. Again, my colleagues earlier have already highlighted how access to suitable marshalling and integration ports is critical for the success of floating wind developments. This is why at the ITT Stage 1, bidders must identify primary and alternative seaports which they propose to use for their activities. ITT1 will also include a requirement to provide a letter of comfort from the relevant ports, giving assurances that the ports will be available for use at an appropriate time and to support your development. We all understand here in this room that we cannot let the port capacity become a critical path activity or a blocker to development. That's why we have set up the ITT in this way, in order to address the topic head-on and ensure that clear commitments are in place. Finally, in terms of development plan, bidders must populate a PDA-agnostic development plan template which supports the delivery of the developments. These will include 3 key milestones: an initial site development scoping report milestone at 18 months from the start of the agreement for lease. Then we had a consent application for offshore wind and offshore transmission route submitted to the PINS or the Welsh government within 5 years from the start of the IFL. And finally, a port commitment, which needs to be in line with the ITT Stage 1 commitment that the bidders have put forward in the other question. So the milestones will form part of the successful bidder's obligations under the preferred bidder letter and further on in the wind farm agreement for lease. So this concludes the overview of the ITT technical requirements. So again, I realize that we've covered a lot and more, but there will be more detail and more guidance in the actual ITT documents. However, hopefully this has given you a good idea of the topics that all of us in this room really care about and the positive outcomes we want this leasing round 5 to deliver. So in other words, we really would like to satisfy ourselves all that only the bidders that have the right technical competence and the robust plans are admitted to the final stage of this tender, which is the ITT Stage 2 and the Rising Clock auction. I now move on to the financial envelope of the ITT Stage 1, where we have the concept, where we introduce basically the concept of maximum level of cash. So we are expecting that the short, medium-term expenditure for any bidder participating in round 5 are the development costs and the option fee bids for this round 5 process. So the maximum level of cash will introduce 2 parameters: a threshold for participating in ITT Stage 2 auction, which is based on 18 months annual development costs of 30 million, which is a nominal figure, which will be used across for all bidders, which is a 45 million pounds threshold. And then we have the concept of a cap on a participant option fee bids in the auction, which is based again on the threshold, 45 million pounds for the development, for the DevEx costs, and plus 3 full year 1.5 gigawatt capacity option fees for 3 years, which is the minimum commitment that any bidder will sign up to if they are successful in the auction. The maximum level of cash will be made based on a bidder's cash or cash equivalent and undrawn borrowing facilities, as stated in the bidder's most recent set of audit and financial statements, which might be the ones that you've submitted already at the PQQ stage, or any other more recent audited accounts that you may have received between the PQQ submission and the ITT submission. Similarly to the PQQ approach, where a sole bidder entity or a consortium member entity relied upon a guarantor at PQQ stage, that same guarantor, most recent audited financial statement, will form the basis of the MLOC. In terms of how the MLOC will be calculated in a consortium scenario, the consortium MLOC will be calculated on an additive basis, taking into account all members or their guarantors' contribution, irrespective of the percentage contribution declared at the PQQ or the shareholding structure. So this is different. So in PQQ, you have a percentage contribution that you will define here. All consortium members will contribute to the MLOC value. So as this concept is quite a critical one that affects your ability to participate into the auction and also on the level of bids that you can put forward, I think it would be useful to show you this worked example on how the MLOC is calculated. So we have here a case of a bidder with cash reserves of 495 million. So as you can see, they would comfortably pass the threshold for participating in auction, so at the ITT stage 2, so they will be invited to the auction with no issues. In terms of the cap, the bidder, if so chooses, is allowed to bid up to £100,000 per megawatt per year, with this illustrative amount of option fee bid, which is calculated in reverse from their overall MLOC of £495 million. So I would like to be clear that the MLOC is only a test to set a credible ceiling and ensuring the companies put forward bids that they can afford, but is not intended to direct the actual option fee bids that the bidders will put forward at the auction and which will be within your decision. So this brings us to the end of the overview at the ITT stage 1. In terms of the outcome, similarly to the PQQ, each question will be evaluated on a pass-fail basis, and you have to pass all the criteria to be awarded a pass, and then to be invited to the ITT stage 2 auction. Bidders, again, will be notified of the outcome and also of their level of the MLOC via the portal. And we set no limits to the number of bidders passing to the ITT stage 2. And this brings to the end of this overview. As I said, we will take, again, a short pause and, again, stretch your legs and be ready to join then my colleague Simon Goodwin, which will take us through the ITT stage 2. So I'll see you in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
So, welcome back. I'm pleased to see that we've still got a full audience. I'm very conscious that Jess and I are standing between everybody and lunch, so we'll get through our final 2 sessions of the morning as promptly as we can. So, thank you, Matt. So I'm going to talk to you about the final stage of the invitation to tender process. And what we've got on this slide is the 4 key areas of the invitation to tender stage. I'm going to start then by firstly talking about the preferred bidder letter. So this is a prerequisite that all bidders must sign the preferred bidder letter to be invited through into the auction. What the preferred bidder letter does is to confirm that the preferred bidders will confirm that there's been no changes to their PQQ or their ITT response. that bidders haven't breached the terms of our tender process, and we're also asking bidders to confirm that they will unconditionally accept the terms of our legal agreements. And my colleague Jess Astle, in the final session of the morning, will talk to you in further detail about those. In terms of the signatories of the preferred bidder letters, if you're a sole bidder, then clearly the sole bidder itself will sign the preferred bidder letter. If you're a consortium, then all members of the consortium will need to sign the preferred bidder letter, and that will be on a joint and several basis. The letter will require that bidders that are successful in the rising clock auction process enter into the wind farm agreement for lease, and that will be subject to payment of the option fee deposit and the HRA conformity check, which we'll come to in a few minutes. Bidders that don't become preferred bidders through our auction process, the preferred bidder letter will fall away through. Look, I know this won't happen, but I do just want to draw your attention to the fact that there will be certain circumstances where we could terminate the preferred bidder letter, and that is, for example, if a bidder fails to adhere to the process that we've set out, fails to enter into the agreement for lease. As I say, I don't expect that that will happen at all, but that would give us the ability to terminate the preferred bidder letter, and it would also allow the Crown Estate to seek damages in that circumstance as well. So, as a reminder, Nello indicated that we'll give you the opportunity to red flag all of the agreements, including the preferred bidder letter, at the PQQ stage, and we will at ITT stage 1 have given you those fully termed agreements as well. So that's all I'm going to say on the preferred bidder letter. Rising clock auction we'll talk about primarily on the next slide, but in headlines, the aim of the auction is to determine for each PDA the bidder that is offering the highest option fee bid for that PDA. What we're going to do is to do that through a rising clock auction, so the price of each PDA may rise between each of the auction rounds, and what we're looking for is to find a single bidder for each of the PDAs that offers the highest option fee bid price. When we establish that, we will stop the auction, and we'll talk about further about the payment of the option fee deposit and the HRA conformity check. And again, we'll sort of touch on these on the next slide. So the next slide then is a bit of a busy slide, but if I do my job well, hopefully you'll follow it as we go through. So what we're setting out here is an expanded view of 3 of the auction rounds, and that will help me to explain what happens within the auction round, and also what happens between the auction rounds. So the process of the auction will be delivered or will be determined by the auction rules. We will issue the auction rules at the commencement of ITT 1. And as per the heads of terms, we will give you the opportunity to review the auction rules. We'll give you the opportunity to ask clarification questions through the ITT stage 1 clarification process. And we'll also give you the opportunity to red flag those auction rules. We will not be publishing until later on in the tender process the expected start prices for each of the PDAs, but we will clearly give you those start prices before the auction round commences through. So, just a few bits around the pricing. So, in terms of the PDAs, the price for each of those PDAs can be different in each of the auction rounds. So, auction round 1, PDAs won't necessarily all start at the same price. As we move into the subsequent rounds, the increments might be different as well for each of those PDAs. The option fee, as Nello has indicated, the bid that you will make will be in pounds per megawatt per annum. And if you are participating in the auction, then you will have to make a bid in each of the auction rounds. And if you want to be invited into the next auction round, you will have to bid at the auction round price for one of those PDAs. If you've determined that you are going to exit the auction, then you can bid on a PDA at below the auction round price, and you won't then be invited into the next auction round, but you could still win based on the price of your bid in that last auction round that you participate in, if you turn out to be the highest price bidder on a particular PDA. So some important points there. Pricing won't be the same for each of the PDAs. Increments won't necessarily be the same for each of the PDAs, and you must always bid. If you don't bid, you will be exiting the auction, and you won't be invited to the next round, but you can still win. It's probably just worth saying that whilst the auction round is open, a bidder will be able to submit or withdraw a bid during that period. But once you go beyond the bid submission deadline, then you have made an unconditional bid. You will not be able to withdraw the bid at that point. It will be binding on you. So I said that I would also talk to you about the interval. We've said that we've changed our process to try and give additional transparency to bidders of where price is moving and how interest is on the different PDAs. So for the auction round that we've just completed, we'll obviously tell you which round it was we were talking about, so which number it was. We'll remind you of the auction round price for each of the PDAs. We'll tell you the number of compliant bids received, and we'll tell you the number of bidders on each of the PDAs as well. Then, in terms of the next auction round, we'll tell you when that auction round will commence. We'll tell you what the bid submission deadline for the next auction is, and we'll tell you the auction round price for each of the PDAs. We're going to, as you'd expect, reserve the right to be able to suspend the process if we find it necessary to do so. But we will set out effectively an anticipated timetable for the auction process ahead of the auction starting. The process, just to be clear to you, will be a confidential process in terms of we will not, within the auction round, if you're invited to the auction, you'll have complete transparency of the rounds and the information that I've just indicated. We won't be putting any of the information in or between rounds into the public domain, but we will, once the auction has concluded, we will be announcing the winners for each of the PDAs, very much as we did with round 4. So just a reminder, The auction stops when we've got effectively a single bidder for each of the PDAs that is offering the highest price. And to be clear, what we're looking to do is to award rights for 3 different bidders. So again, sort of different from round 4 where you could win multiple sites. So just to be clear, it stops when we've got the single highest bidder for each PDA, and we expect to award rights for all of the 3 PDAs to different bidders. You'll be pleased to know I've just got one more slide that I'm going to talk through. So we'll stop the auction at the point that the criteria that I've just met have been met. And then there'll be 2 important steps that we need to do at that point in time. The first is the payment of the option fee deposit, which essentially must be paid immediately on the auction stopping. And then we'll also do the HRA conformity check. My colleague Sean will pick up more on that later on in the day. In terms of the option fee deposit, you will be paying the amount that is equivalent to that that the successful bidders bid in the last relevant phase of the auction. That's £1 per megawatt per year. So you'll be paying that fee, and you'll be paying 1 year's worth of fee as your option fee deposit. In terms then of the plan level HRA, what the plan level HRA is doing is to identify the plan level mitigations which are required, and those will become obligations under the agreements for lease and then in the leases. So when you see the fully termed agreements at ITT stage 1, you will see all of the mitigations. But Sean, as I've said, will talk to you more on that stage later on today. Throughout the tender process, we will continue to monitor that there has been nothing changed that would impact our HRA, but we will need to do a final check following the auction process and before granting preferred bidder status. Once we've granted preferred bidder status, we will move swiftly on to getting those preferred bidders under their agreements for lease. I've promised you that we've now just got one final session, so Jess will pick up and talk to you further about those legal agreements. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Simon. Good morning, everybody. As Simon said, I'm fully conscious I'm the lawyer standing between you and lunch, and I promise I'm going to be swift. Good morning. I'm Jess Astle, Legal Counsel for Marine at the Crown Estate. And as Matt explained, my role in this part of the session is to explain the key legal agreements, the process winning bidders will follow to enter into a wind farm agreement for lease, and some of the detail of the wind farm agreement for lease, the agreement that enables you to take your first step in development of your round 5 projects. For those that are familiar with the previous leasing round, round 4, to provide some reassurance to you, the key legal agreements are similar in form to those that we tendered for that round. And as Nello explained earlier, bidders will have the opportunity to red flag comments on the heads of terms of those agreements at PQQ stage to flag anything that would prevent your company from entering into these agreements. You'll then receive long-form versions of those documents at ITT stage 1 and confirm that you're in a position to sign up to them prior to the auction at ITT stage 2. Next slide. Thank you. So let me take you through the key legal agreements for round 5. First up, you'll sign the preferred bidder letter, as Simon went through earlier. This is executed by all bidders going into the auction at ITT stage 2, but falls away for those bidders that are unsuccessful in the auction. Subject to the receipt of the option fee deposit and completion of the HRA conformity check, winning bidders will move through the process outlined in the preferred bidder letter to each execute an agreement for lease with us. The wind farm agreement for lease is then up next, and this is the agreement under which you'll receive seabed rights from us for a PDA. There'll be one wind farm agreement for lease per PDA, so 3 in total for round 5. And the wind farm agreement for lease grants the relevant project company an option to develop the PDA within a maximum 10-year period from signature. Exercise of one or more options is conditional upon the project company satisfying certain conditions set out in the wind farm AFL. And once those conditions are satisfied, the project company will be granted a wind farm lease. The wind farm lease is for a maximum of 60 years to enable you to construct and operate your wind farm project or phase. And 60 years also accounts for 2 wind farm life cycles. There'll be the option to break from year 25 following construction completion. Same as round 4, the wind farm agreement for lease will include the right to call for a transmission agreement for lease. And in turn, the transmission agreements for lease will lead to a transmission lease. Should project companies wish to explore alternative energy export options, such as hydrogen, please do let us know as soon as possible, as amendments will need to be made to the legal agreements to enable that opportunity. That's the key legal agreements. On the following slides, I'll focus in a bit more detail on the wind farm agreement for lease. So, following the end of the auction at ITT Stage 2, and once the option fee deposit has been paid and the HRA conformity check has been completed satisfactorily, winning bidders will move through the process outlined in the preferred bidder letter to execute a wind farm agreement for lease with us. This process we expect to take a minimum of 3 months, owing to the judicial review period linked to the HRA conformity check, and to allow you the time to submit the various documents required pursuant to entry into the wind farm agreement for lease, such as your letters of credit. On execution of the wind farm AFL, this is a point that commitments that you make on ports and social value become binding obligations in the wind farm agreement for lease. Our asset managers will be monitoring your compliance with these commitments throughout the term of the wind farm agreement for lease and onwards into the leases. The wind farm agreements for lease will also oblige the project companies to deliver a positive environmental plan that Matt spoke about earlier. That plan needs to be delivered within 6 months of entry into the wind farm agreement for lease. Compliance with a positive environmental plan will be an ongoing obligation throughout the term of the wind farm agreement for lease and potentially into the lease, depending on the commitments made. That's all. As I explained earlier, each wind farm agreement for lease that's granted in respect of each PDA gives the project company the option to take out 1 or more wind farm leases over its 10-year option period. In order to provide you with some flexibility around consenting, construction and CFD phasing, round 5 wind farm developments can be built out in projects and phases. A project we expect to have 1 DCO or equivalent consent, and a project can be split into different phases. The maximum number of projects or phases within a PDA is 3, and each would be subject to a separate wind farm lease, subject, of course, to the minimum project or phase capacity of 300 megawatts and the minimum PDA capacity of 500 megawatts. The graphic you can see above me here explains a few non-exhaustive examples of this optionality. For example, in option 1, you could choose to develop the entirety of your PDA in one go as one project, which we'd love, only calling for 1 wind farm agreement for lease in this example. But if you wanted to develop out your PDA in smaller projects and phases, options 2 and 3 show how that could be done. In terms of how this would match up with your transmission asset agreements, we do want to see you minimise the number of unique transmission cable routes to shore and to maximise the use of seabed for your PDA development. So transmission infrastructure should be considered with that in mind. Also, as is usual for any agreement for lease with us, the wind farm agreement for lease will set milestones to ensure your development progresses in line with a reasonable and expected programme. And project companies will also have the right, as usual, to carry out surveys and install measurement equipment within the boundary of the PDA. One aspect that I'm sure you're interested in, it's not actually reflected in the slides here, but you have read about it in the information memorandum, is the ability for the project company and its shareholders to change control during the period of the wind farm agreement for lease and beyond into any lease. As you'll appreciate, our tender process is geared towards understanding and assessing your capability to develop your round 5 projects either as a sole bidder or as a consortium. And if you're choosing the latter, you may be relying on different companies in the consortium to bring different strengths to build out your projects. A change of control prior to obtaining your DCO or equivalent consent will therefore be at the Crown Estate's absolute discretion. Post-consent, a change of control of less than 25% will be permitted without our consent, and during the lease, once generation's been achieved, that threshold increases to 50%. Any changes outside of these thresholds will be subject to our consent. Next slide. Thank you. Better? Thanks. Moving on to option fees now, and as you'll have read in our information memorandum, project companies commit to paying the option fee for at least the first 3 years of the option period, with a full PDA capacity of 1.5 gigawatts. And from the beginning of the 4th year of the option period, as you can see here, the option fee ceases to be payable for any capacity that has stepped through into a wind farm lease, or where that capacity has been handed back to the Crown Estate. Now, acknowledging that a key risk to successful wind farm delivery will be securing development consents for a new technology, we've introduced an option fee risk share as a new feature for round 5. So if, after year 6 of the wind farm agreement for lease, a project company can demonstrate that a valid option notice would have been served, but for an unavoidable delay in obtaining a key project consent that's been applied for, any subsequent option fees due for the remainder of the option period will be discounted by 50% in respect of the relevant capacity remaining in the PDA. At the end of the 10-year option period, the wind farm agreement for lease automatically expires, and any unused and unleased capacity in the PDA reverts back to the Crown Estate. That's all from me. I'll hand you back to Matt now to lead you off into lunch. Thank you.
Okay, apologies for the sound problems there. I hope you caught all of that, and we tried to correct that at the end. Thanks again to Nello, Jess, and Simon for taking us through that section. Some really helpful further detail. So at this point, we're going to take a lunch break. Sorry that we've run over a small amount. We're going to leave the Slido open for the next 10 minutes. So if there are questions that have come into your mind during that last section, please do get them onto the Slido. We can have a look at them and hopefully try and bring those into the Q&A later this afternoon. And a reminder that it isn't just Slido, that we will have a roving microphone for the Q&A session on leasing this afternoon. So if you don't get your questions onto Slido, make sure you're sort of warmed up and ready to get your hand right up in the air to grab that mic. Okay, enjoy your lunch and we'll see you after.